Well, good morning again from Silicon Valley. This is Marco Marinucci from Mind the Bridge with another Mind the Chat. Today, we have the opportunity to have with us Alexa Gorman, SVP and Head of SAP Foundries in EMEA. Hi, Alexa.
Good evening, Marco, from Berlin.
Good evening is right. And it's funny because when I said, hi, Alexa, that's what I normally tell my Alexa. So I'm sure that I hear that all the time. But
I'll have two people answering you.
I'm sure. Do you have an Alexa at home?
No, my husband says one Alexa is enough in the house. So.
That's awesome. All right. Very good to have you. And this Mind the Chat is obviously under the umbrella of the Corporate Startup Stars, and you as SAP and SAP IO, and we'll talk about, will be and are one of the Corporate Startup Stars. So first of all, congratulations on that award. I think it's well deserved, and we'll talk about the reasons why.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor.
Very good. So, Alexa, maybe let's start with a little bit of your background, and then kind of the area of the company where you sit in. If I'm correct, you're almost at your 20 years mark with SAP. Is that right?
I'm just over my 20-year mark. Yes, yes. It's hard to believe. It's hard to believe. I started in SAP in 1999. In the retail area in business development and marketing in Germany, and then had the opportunity to move to New York to lead marketing activities for the retail product there. And then after 2 years to move to Paris, where I joined the strategy team and had a number of different roles within strategy, led the portfolio development team, for example. And then in 2017, I had the opportunity in Berlin to join SAP IO, and that's where I still am today. So had quite a journey and was able to build a big network, which again helps me today in my current role working with startups.
I'm sure. I mean, and we could talk about SAP as a group, and then we'll dive in within your group of reference. So give us a reference of SAP, obviously as one of the largest companies in technology, but in particular, the different areas within SAP where open innovation is addressed, whether that's through an investments or through different programs.
So like you rightly said, we're in the area of B2B SaaS technology. So we provide companies of all sizes, software solutions to run their businesses, to run their customer relationships, to run their employee relationships, supplier relationships. So really across all lines of business and also across all industries. And I think in the meantime, we're about at 450,000 customers worldwide. So we drive open innovation in a number of different areas. First of all, SAP IO is part of the New Ventures and Technology Group. So we're situated in the office of the CTO and the CTO board area. And in that area, we drive both startup-driven innovation and acceleration, as well as employee-driven innovation and acceleration. So we have a team that works with the ecosystem of early-stage startups to bring that innovation to our customers. In some cases as well, of course, SAP uses the technology themselves, but the real goal of the startup activities is to build this open innovation ecosystem and to create what we like to call a win-win-win situation, a win for the customers, a win for SAP, and a win for the startups. before I dive into that, maybe just cover the other areas, and I'll go into that a bit
Yeah.
more detail. On the internal side, we have an intrapreneurship team that scouts and upskills employees with very innovative ideas that can bring really organic innovation to SAP. That's a year-long process where this innovation gets nurtured, the ideas get developed. We have a lot of very talented experts internally and externally that work with these teams, and then at the end of the year, there is an investment committee meeting where they present their ideas, similar to a kind of VC investment committee, and a couple of the teams get funding then and move on to what we call the SAP Venture Studio, where they then really can focus on that idea. The IP in this case stays obviously with SAP, but the employees get a lot of freedom to really create and start up within SAP. So those are the two key areas where we drive, open innovation.
And Alexa, is the entrepreneurship program as a name, a code name internally, or you just call it the entrepreneurship program?
I just called it that. The team is actually called New Ventures, the New Ventures team, and they drive what we call grassroots innovation.
And is there any particular areas where each year the focus of the intrapreneurship is posed on?
Yeah, so what we do actually at the beginning of every year is we have, we call them innovation roundtables, where we actually meet with solution management, product management that really drive the direction of the products for SAP. And on one side, we bring back what we're seeing in the market, what new trends in terms of startup trends we're seeing, what technology trends we're seeing, so that informs them in their ongoing product development, roadmap development. And we discuss with them where are the white spaces of SAP, what are they developing basically with the engineering teams, but what are specific areas where they would either like us to scout externally, so we have a partner situation, or where is it more of a build situation where we say, okay, when the intrapreneurship team does a large campaign internally, we can focus that campaign obviously also around specific areas. And so this kind of is our top-down guidance that we then take in the different lines of business or in the different industries to guide our work, both when we talk to external startups, but also internally when we look for that innovation internally.
So internally, the people that apply to this program, are they typically more of the product managers kind of a background, or across the board?
It's across the board. So I think one of the things that we do look for is that it's not a single founder, so to say. So if your idea is good enough, Marco, we would say, go and find a couple of people that you can convince about this idea, and then that forms the first kind of team that then starts developing the idea, that gets first customer feedback, so that they can then pass the investment committee. So we have from UX designers to people who are working on the field side, on the sales side, to product managers with ideas. So it is a mix, and then obviously we look for that mix then within the teams as they mature their ideas and then ultimately products.
And when you say the pitch as to investors, they pitch a budget, I assume, but there is no company being created there, just a budget to go to the next step.
It's exactly, yes. So they then leave their jobs. So they leave their day jobs and get basically, they can focus their time then on that idea. And with a budget, they can start hiring and developing the product just like they would any startup, but it's an SAP company, so to say. It's an SAP product, it's not a separate entity. Yeah.
Got it. And that feeds into, as you were mentioning, the SAP Venture Studio, where probably the more mature and the extra filter happens. So tell us a little bit more how the Venture Studio works.
So the Venture Studio basically provides additional guidance then to continue to develop this idea. There are regular investor meetings, so to say, where the progress gets reviewed, milestones are set, and the team continues to evolve that product over a specific amount of time, and it varies a little bit on the solution itself. So it's very much similar to what would happen externally with investors and with a startup idea. The same happens internally. We have resources that support them, that can help them on the technology side. Of course, the advantage a little bit is they are under the SAP name and the SAP umbrella, and they have access to SAP's customers, which of course help them in that very early phase. Get to product market fit and get to a situation where they can then really scale their business. And I mean, a good example of a company like this is Room, RUUM, that started in exactly this manner. They have a very interesting collaboration software. And once they finish, once they have reached a certain scale, they graduate, so to say, out of the venture studio and then join the regular line of business team as a normal SAP product.
How do you staff within the venture studio? Is it all internal, or sometimes you just open it also to outsiders?
So we have a mix of outsiders and people from the ecosystem who are very knowledgeable in this space to also work with the startups. It's a little bit dependent on the startup or the internal startups needs, and we have obviously a large ecosystem that we work with anyway, also on the external side, that then can come and work with them or share experiences. Sometimes it's just as easy as an entrepreneur sharing her experiences about the journey that they've gone through, and it can be from that to investment advice, etc., or just being able to bounce off an idea or a path from somebody externally can be very valuable.
Got it. Give us some numbers of the funnel. So how many in the entrepreneurship program apply, how many get through it or get funded, and how many within the venture studio at any given time?
So we touch about 20,000 employees through these activities, which is very large. We have a very large network of ambassadors that then, of course, beat the drum, etc., for SAP, the program, and for then to become an internal startup. We typically have, I would have to look at the exact numbers, roughly about 100 that are then to a point where it's a real idea, that has a little bit of meat around it, because there's many ideas. And then we work with those companies over the course of the year to mature the ideas. We then have actually acceleration programs also internally, where they continue to get coaching and guidance. And we typically work there, and there's a few of these a year with around 20 companies. And it depends greatly how many make it. It's hard to say a given number, how many make it into the final, because it's really dependent on the idea and how compelling that is. So that can be, it's a subset of those 20 then join in there.
Whereas in a venture studio, how many companies are there at any given time?
So they basically, those that graduate out of the Intrapreneurship program are then the next generation, so to say, of venture studio. I could look it up. I don't know the exact number of companies. Again, that also varies based on how many have graduated in 1 year. This year we had a few graduations, like Room, for example, that left. We have new ones coming in. So I would need to look, but I think it's about 10, but
Got it. Yeah, that's what I was,
me.
like a dozen. And
yeah,
within the venture studio, the time that you spend within the venture studio, I'm sure that varies based on what you're building. So
exactly. So a certain maturity needs to be there before then they can graduate into the normal business.
Good. And now, before we go a little deeper into IO, so then the other two activities are kind of the opposite spectrums in open innovation are the university alliances, and then the more mature Sapphire Venture VC, right?
Correct. So we have university alliances is really to working with the students while they're still studying, while they're doing their PhD, as they're about to graduate, just to kind of work with them to kind of waken that entrepreneurial idea, the spirit, the spark, to see if there are ways in which they would need support, which ways we can have our SAP mentors work with them in any form. And there's a number of different programs that nurture that early, more of an incubation phase, I'd say. And then we have the Venture Studio, the Sapphire Ventures. Yeah, sorry, the Sapphire Venture phase, that is a later stage investment. So they focus on Series C and onwards. They have a fund that also does a little bit earlier in some spaces, but in general, it's a growth fund that focuses on the later stage. And we work closely together on the SAP IO fund, where we also make investments in early stage startups. We work closely there with Sapphire Ventures.
Got it. Okay, so we got the 10 minutes for the wide spectrum of activities. Now let's dive into your world of reference. The SAP.io is interesting because the IO is not there's a little I and a big O. Why is that?
We believe in a small input can have a large output. So we're actually a small team that we believe is driving a large output in terms of value, both for customers, the startups, and SAP.
So, and then you're organized in Foundries with different locations around the world and growing, because I remember initially with just a couple of locations and now you're doubled even more. So give us a little bit more of a sense of the structure and what's the matrix between geographies versus the areas that you address through your programs.
Mm-hmm. So we have, like you said, we're regionally focused. So we have the US, we have 2 foundries in New York and San Francisco. In APJ, you rightly said we opened new foundries. So we opened Singapore and Tokyo last year and Bangalore this year. So we have 3 locations there currently. And in EMEA, we have Berlin, Munich, Paris, and Tel Aviv. We run 2 programs per year per foundry along a line of business or a theme. So we have seen over the last 3 years that the best impact we can have or the best value we can drive is really if we group around a specific line of business, where it could be the future of work, for example, the future of procurement, or a specific industry like consumer products that we just ran in Tel Aviv, or utilities like we're running now, because it really helps get startups that are in the same area, but also especially when we make those customer introductions, we can target the customers very well, and the customers get a lot from the exchange just because they get a wide range of different solutions that work well with what their investments that they have made with SAP. Also to get the mentors, etc. A theme or a line of business or industry is very helpful there. So we typically run 2 programs a year with anywhere between 6 and 10 startups per program. So I'd say we average out at about 15 per year per location. And the way we decide what topic is, one is through the top-down guidance that we get from a strategic perspective. What are the white spaces that are of strategic importance that we would like to look for partners, coupled with what kind of innovation are we seeing, what kind of startup innovation are we seeing in a specific area, and what are the needs, basically. So where can we, that we don't do the same theme, obviously 3 times in the same location, that we try and see what can we see. Now that was pre-COVID. During COVID, we realized that actually it doesn't matter what location, because we're getting very international, a very global reach, because we're running these programs now virtually, we don't need to, if we're running a program in Munich, we may have 1 or 2 companies from Germany, but we may also have no companies from Munich and a lot from around. So it has the local focus through these virtual programs is a lot less than it was before. And what we just now need to think about is the time zones people are in. So if we're going to do an event, or we're going to do a workshop, or we're going to have meetings, that we don't have Australia and San Francisco and Central Europe all in the same. That makes it a little bit different. But we're running, for example, Tel Aviv has Australian startups in there, and it runs beautifully. So that has changed since beginning of the year.
And probably the big question is what will be after, right? That's all these questions that all of us in that space are kind of asking ourselves. Is there a lot of efficiencies in being remote? If you make it work, then it's hard to go back the way it was before. So I'm sure there will be a mix of local opportunities with digital connections. I know here, for example, in San Francisco, you have a separate space. The idea that a foundry has to be more of a startup friendly and not within all the big buildings that SAP also has here. Is that the same everywhere, that you try to be a separate kind of a hub?
Um, so we have always separate offices that have a little bit of a different look and feel than the rest of the offices. But in New York, for example, the Foundry is part of the SAP, which is very nice offices in New York. They're in the offices of SAP in New York. In Munich is the same thing. In Berlin is as well. Tel Aviv is, for example, separate. It's in a co-working space. So it varies a little bit by location. Tokyo again is in the SAP offices. I think within the four walls of the Foundry, then we have a lot of freedom to have the design thinking area, to have the co-working space, to kind of have it according to our needs.
How is the selection process there? Does it have always to be validated by some of your business units or areas, that are a focus of the company, or is that something that you manage internally?
The selection of the startups, you mean, or
Startups,
the location?
Yeah, the startups.
So actually, I hope you can still hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. So the startups we select always jointly together with product and solution management and also our sales team. So it's very important for us that there is an acceptance from the business of the companies that we're working with, because they're the ones that will be working with them on a long-term basis as well. And so we like to look for what we think are the rising stars, the most innovative out in the different areas. And what we do literally is a little bit of a white glove service. So what any startup in the world, with or without SAP IO, can work with SAP, because we have an API business hub, we have the cloud platform technology, and all of that is accessible to partners of all sizes. And for me, startups are just partners of a smaller side. They're starting their journey. So any startup can work with SAP. What we do basically is that white glove service by taking them by the hand, making the right introductions so that they can scale their businesses faster through working with us. So we make the introductions in a very targeted way to our customers. We have technical resources that can sit down with them, take a look at their solution, take a look at the SAP solution, decide what the integration use case is, support them on that, make sure they get the right connections. So everything goes a lot faster. And so these programs are typically 3 to 4 months long, which is, again, the beginning of the journey, I always like to say, because knowing software and knowing enterprise software, an integration can happen in 4 weeks, and we've had that, but an integration can also take 6 months, just because of the complexity and depending on where the data resides and what data needs to flow between the two systems. So we kickstart the relationship in those 3 months, but it's a long-term relationship, and we see that with the companies that have started to work with us, some of them in 2017, where we made an investment then in 2019, for example, and they're getting onto their app center now, which some things take longer, also just based on also where the startups are in their personal journey. But for that reason, also, we like to focus on Series A, Series B companies, just because they are ready to scale and they have the resources to then work with us on that integration, so that they can, and they have then the sales teams also to start working with us to address the customers.
You mentioned the fact when you make an investment, so we can talk about when and how, but also the fact that it need to be on your app store. Is that always a precondition, or sometimes you can also accelerate startups that have a separate maybe B2C company that not necessarily is using your APIs?
So the companies that, for a startup to work with SAP or SAP IO, it only really makes sense if they're targeting our customers, or if our customers need their solutions, because that's when we get this win-win situation. A B2C customer, we are not able to really help, because B2B is our expertise, and we can make introductions to enterprise customers, but we're not the experts when it comes to B2C marketing, which is a completely different game. And so we really only focus on B2B customers that are targeting our customers and that our customers see value in. So we, for example, in the selection that you mentioned earlier, we involve our customers. So we have customers sitting in the room with us that are giving us feedback. We have salespeople that would tell us, that's a startup I would take to visit my customer. And and this is really valuable, because sometimes we have the most innovative companies in the room, but the salesperson says, you know what, if I bring this startup, I can't sell what I have. And I know from that moment we're not going to able to help that startup, no matter how innovative it is. And then we give the startup the package to say, okay, this is how you do it on your own, but we're not able to give you that service because the salespeople won't take you to the customer. And so we really try to look for the situation where the investment that the startup makes in the program, which is an investment of time, it's an investment of resources, needs to also bring a return. And we understand that they have limited resources. And so we're very conscious of not wanting to waste anybody's time, and that we promise something that we can't fulfill. So we're pretty stringent on at the beginning of the process to make sure that the companies that we then have in our portfolio are really ones that we can then broadly promote, that we can have at conferences, and that will help the salespeople also position SAP while they're positioning the startup.
I'm interested, with all the programs that you run, a dozen of programs that you run within the Foundries, how do you engage so many people from the business unit or from the sales organization as part of the selection? Because what's their incentives of spending their time in helping you with the selection of those companies?
So one is, it's a personally rewarding just to take a step out of their day-to-day and actually see a new world, right? So it's very different. If you're a product or a solution manager, you're working on your product, and you don't get that much time to start looking. Of course, they visit conferences and they're doing, but this is just it's a speed dating of innovation in one day, right?
And do you use a platform to do that? Especially now it's all spread out. You have your internal platform for judging, or was there
yes, we have a platform that we use to evaluate, and that we then are able to compare the notes. So we have that. We've also moved that to online, and there too we're seeing that it's actually very good, because you can all of a sudden involve people who wouldn't be able to take a day out of their schedule and fly maybe across the world to join. So that too has been a very positive experience in the last couple of months. But it's not difficult to convince the internal people to join, and typically when we are in a specific area, and we can take HR again as an area, just as an example, we work from the top down. So it's there's an interest from the line of business, because they're also investing their resources and time, that we make the right selection together. And so they will send people, or they will have their experts join us to give valuable input that we can then take. And basically our job is to take that input. We do the first level of screening down to looking at the businesses, looking at the founders, etc. And then that last mile of selection is done jointly with the different stakeholders. And again, that's where, and I have many colleagues like this who've spent some time at SAP, we have the network, and because we've run programs now a few times in the same areas, we know who to involve so that we get that comprehensive feedback.
But that's the other challenge in a company with 100,000 people. What's the normal number of employees?
A little more than 100,000.
Exactly. Yeah. So even to know who to talk to, that's a challenge by itself. To find the right connection.
Yes, but we tend to manage. I think we've had a few funny examples of finding, a startup asks me if we could speak to the COO of SAP Mexico, and the next morning I was able to put the two of them into contact.
There we go.
Somebody. It's like the internal, somebody who knows somebody, and then you get the connection.
That's already a success story right there. So let's talk about the option of also being invested. So the SAP.io fund that does, I think, investments as you see fit.
So this is a fund that was created at the same time as the Foundries. It's a fund that where we make investments in the seed and Series A stage, and we have some where we can make we have made follow-on investments. We typically don't lead a round. It's a strategic investment. We don't take a board seat, but we need a tier 1, tier 2 VC to lead the round, and then we match the terms. These are specifically also strategic areas for SAP where we see a great value for our customers. And yeah, I sometimes compare the two programs because the value that we provide startups in both is very similar. The Foundries is more like a sprint at the beginning, and then they run on their own, whereas the fund investment's a little bit more of a marathon. So it's a longer term, regular relationship where we have business developers that work with them to bring them to the customers. We have bi-weekly calls with them where we try and support in any way we can. And the Foundries is very intensive in the beginning. And then it's more of a quarterly basis where we do the check-ins because of just the numbers as well, and we can't work as such close. So the fund is a much smaller amount of startups that we work with there, and the relationship is closer.
Got it. And but is independent in the way that it's run, and also the topics, I assume. What is the number of companies? What's the overlap? The number of companies that went through one of your accelerators?
It's not more than a handful. Yes, it's a handful.
All right. So back to the Foundries. How do you measure your success? I guess it's pretty simple in this case, and the number of integration that happens. But do you also measure the follow up? The kind of the potential of other revenues that comes from those relationships.
Yeah, so we have 3 key things that we measure. One is very easy, the NPS score of the startups. Once they leave a program, did we deliver on our promise, at least in the first 3 months? Then we measure, of course, the integrations and how many of them get onto the SAP App Center, which is the marketplace where our customers go to buy partner solutions, and where our salespeople are also compensated when a sale happens through the App Center, so they have an incentive to position the startups with the customers. We also measure very closely because if we're talking about delivering value to our customers, the best proof of that value is adoption of the startup solutions. And so there we measure closely a number of deals between the startups and the customers. And a deal can be anything from a pilot to a joint deal where we go in together to the deal. To a POC. I mean, it can vary to an annual contract, and we measure and track that as closely as we can. I'll say, because with given volume, and people forget to tell us, and salespeople forget to tell us, so we're working on that still. But we track that, and we set ourselves important goals to meet, and we track that on a regular basis, both in terms of the fund but also on the Foundry, because again that also influences then longer term the status of because once they graduate from SAP IO, they become a partner edge partner, which is a partner type at SAP, and the more successful they are, the more they can graduate to different forms of that partnership. So the traction and the deals with the customer are very important.
Got it. And then I think one of the KPI is also the diversity, right? So there is a program of no boundaries that you launched not too long ago.
Yes, we track that too. So we made a pledge at the beginning of last year. It's called the No Boundaries Pledge, where we pledge to have at least 40% of all the startups we either invest in or work in with the Foundries are led by underrepresented entrepreneurs. And the way what we define as underrepresented entrepreneurs is the proportion in the population versus proportion that get funding. The startups need to self-declare as underrepresented, so it's not something that we nominate them, but they basically have to opt in for that. And the pledge is 40%, and in total in the 5 years. So until 2023, to have 200 startups. And that's something that we also track on a regular basis. And I think at the moment we're roughly at 45%, which is, it's high compared to the average, but it's something that we're continuing to work on.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, so a few minutes, let's talk about the future, right? So we already alluded to it, the post-COVID, and also all the lessons learned through that that can be used in future models. I mean, the first one that comes to me is really in these ongoing methodologies of running accelerators that can be internally driven, done with external parties, with the investment or equity involved or not. What do you think is actually the potential future of startup accelerators?
I think the important thing, no matter what the relationship or what the form of the relationship between corporates and startups is that I think both sides need to be conscious that this is an investment and that there needs to be a meaningful outcome or a win-win situation for both sides. And I think that can be as part of an accelerator program, but it can also be a one-on-one relationship. It can be just an investment. I think it's important, and I think it's becoming more or clearer that there is a need for more than just one offering, because startups are different, the situations are different. Not every startup will want an accelerator. Not every startup will want to do a co-creation or a co-innovation project. And so I think that flexibility is key to determining what makes most sense. What are we trying to achieve? And I think more and more companies, after the first wave of accelerators, where a lot of companies started accelerators, is really to start looking at, why are we doing this? And what are the benefits that this relationship brings for both sides. So I think there will be different, we're seeing this already even with the SAP customers that we're talking to on a regular basis. Some of them have stopped their accelerators, they said, because it was too much. And they're now working with us because they say, okay, we kind of pre-screen, we can do the pre-work for them. Others are saying that they're now opening CVCs. They're starting the venture arms themselves. So I think it's figuring out why they need this, why the startup innovation is important for their overall innovation strategy, and then determining, how best they can leverage that innovation to drive, be it their digitalization agenda or transformation, or some of them are doing it so that they can offer additional services to their customers or solutions to their customers. And again, it depends a little bit on that. And I think there's big room going forward for the different types of collaboration that bring different benefits with them.
Yeah, I think that you guys there are a couple of things they're doing extremely well. One is really to give this flexibility that also is enhanced through the pandemic, honestly, also with the regional. There is a topic that you want to address that makes sense, so it drives the boundaries, but then the rest is really what is the best solution around the world that can fit it, whether it's early stage or later stage or whatever is the fit in your ecosystem. And number two is really to engage your sales channel from day one, because then becomes a very clear KPI that you're tracking. And I think that's definitely one way to to understand whether what you're doing is on the right track or not. Last question: we're in the, you guys address all different areas and technology areas, and not only in your B2B world. You mentioned at the beginning almost 500,000 customers in your business, but in those, what are the areas that you think could be interesting for the future for you guys to look at, in particular at the early stage? Technology speaking.
There's a multitude. I'd say there's a multitude of areas that we're currently looking at, from anything, for example, in the sustainability space, if this is green tech or climate 21. There we see a lot of potential, actually running 2 programs in Munich and Berlin in that, because of the potential. We're actually running 2 programs in the spring of next year. But many other areas where we're seeing a lot of transformation, for example, in the consumer product space, in the data and analytics space, we're seeing new uses of data, new business processes, new business models that are being enabled through that. And so I'd say it's a multitude, because we're serving so many different kinds of customers that we just did a program, or we're just concluding one this week on fan experience, which is something completely new. But the whole topic of experience, be it customer experience, and improving that customer experience, really being able to target the customer, you, Marco, as a customer and your specific needs, that continues to grow. The topic of employee experience, how do we engage, especially in a a situation where everybody is sitting at home and working from home? How do we keep that employee experience? And a lot of customers are looking at that at the moment. The whole supply chain space, we saw again through the pandemic the importance of networks and supply chain and having a resilient and an efficient supply chain, even in situations like the one that we're going through. So there's a multitude of different areas, and we'll continue to really, I'd say, focus on those big topics, but also leave space for niche areas that, like, for example, the fan experience space, which is not a big topic area, because we're seeing a lot of innovation in that space, and we'd like to make that innovation available to our customers.
Excellent. Well, I think there's a lot to look at. I just want to congratulate you again for your achievement and keep up with your
good work. Thank you,
Alexa.
and thanks for the opportunity. Bye-bye.